So welcome again, everyone, to the level 2, part 2 of open data. And today we'll take it a bit easier compared to the previous sessions. Promise. So there's not a lot of materials today. So hopefully, despite the rain and the hot temperatures, we can get through this. Um, yeah, the same trainers as the previous sessions. So I'm just gonna skip over that, but what I won't skip over is what we'll be doing today. So we'll do a short repeat of the fair care principles, which we discussed in level 1. We'll talk a bit about data repositories. We'll talk about a bit about file formats. We are going to focus primarily on how to make your data reusable from the FAIR principles, because we will be working on licenses and documentation. And so most of the session today will focus on setting up your README file for the data sets that you would potentially want to share. And then we'll do a little bit of a repeat from our session on Tuesday on how to do data citation and linking of research outputs, because that is also relevant if you want to share data, not just if you want to reuse it. So that's what this session will look like. And before we're going to start talking about how to share your data, the first question should really be, should you share? Because as we've seen in the previous sessions, not all data can just be shared. And so you have multiple things to keep into consideration. If you cannot, for example, publish your data openly, it is still important to make sure that it is stored somewhere safely so that you can continue to access it, or other researchers interested in the data could potentially be able to access it. And if you want to share the data, there'll be a couple of topics that we'll discuss during this session. For example, repositories, what license should you share it under, and what documentation should it accompany before you share it with the wider public and with other people, other scientists. And so some of the things that we won't go into too much detail, because I think we've done that a lot in level 1. We talked about privacy regulations, informed consent, what to do with vulnerable populations, what if they don't want the data be shared, etc. There's also things like copyright laws and data sovereignty if you're working with indigenous populations. So lots of things to consider. And for today, we're just going to assume that you have a data set in mind that you would like to share publicly. So you have permission, or there's no personal data, no participant data involved, and you are able to share that data. So we'll just go from that assumption. And just a reminder about the care and the FAIR principles. So care is about collective benefits, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. And so this is really about making sure that the data is collected, processed, whatever, handled with care, which is what the principles are saying. Particularly applicable to indigenous data, but as we discussed during level 1, really with any community, such as patients as well, this is really important to keep in mind. We're not going to go in too much detail about that today. We'll go a little bit more in detail about fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, because that's the part where, which is a bit more relevant if you want to open up the data. So care should be there at the start from every research project. You shouldn't even be opening it if it's not conducted in line with the care principles. Then maybe you shouldn't even start the research project. But for today, we'll, as I said, hype, um, we'll start from the point that you are able to share the data. So we'll go into the more technical part of how do you then comply with FAIR principles. And we discussed that a little bit already in level 1. So hopefully this is all very much a refresher and old news to you. So FAIR means findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So for the F, for the findable, you need metadata, descriptive metadata, and a persistent identifier. which is mostly available if you just follow the upload process of a data repository, which is great. And Bosune will tell you more about that. The same for accessible. It doesn't mean that data needs to be openly available, as we mentioned, but access procedures should be in place. And that is also something that data repositories can offer to you. Interoperable is the part where some of the data repositories won't be very helpful, especially if you're using a general data repository. Then it will be difficult or more difficult to integrate different data sets. Whereas if you choose a discipline specific one, then it might be easier to integrate several data sets that are shared. But you yourself can already ensure that your data is more interoperable with other data sets if you follow accepted workflows or metadata standards, if you follow how people are working in the discipline to ensure that it's easier to compare data sets. And then today we'll focus very much on the reusable. And for reusable, you need to have appropriate documentation and you need to select a license. But I'll pass it on to Bosune for the data repository part.
Thank you, Esther. The data repositories, we'll be looking at how should data be submitted, whether to domain or discipline-specific community-recognized repository. When we talk about domain, we're talking about different fields: socioeconomy, medicine, art, and so on and so forth. So the community-recognized ones. For discipline-specific data repository, which are likely to have more functionalities for the type of data that you would like to share. For instance, you can have the gene bank, like we mentioned in the last time. It is tailor-made for genetic data. For community standard, it makes the data more fair. So we have seen that the form of domain base is specific. If you look at the metadata, it is tailored towards that discipline only. For a general purpose repository, for instance, Zenodo, that can be used when there are no suitable discipline-specific repositories. Then most of them assign persistent identifiers for data to become findable. We all know what are persistent identifiers: DOIs, handle, ARC, and so on and so forth, depending on the type and kind of repository that you are considering. And they may place requirement on file format. Let me use example of a domain-specific cassava base hosted by Cornell University. They have what is called the phenotype data there, and they have some genotype data there. They are specific in the type of data that you can put in there. You cannot put CSV there. They have their file format. And when you come to others, they may allow you to use it. So with open data, the data repositories is responsible for long-term preservation and access. For example, you are accessing this slide that we have shared the link with you from Zenodo. Zenodo has the responsibility of preserving that data that is dropped into it, the slides, for long time and for everyone to access. So we have the community one, we have the domain specific, and then we have the generic. That is what I just explained. Then there are different types of data repositories. I love the tree there. I say, I store my data in an open repository. And I could see the root, I could see the stem, and then the leaves and the branches, they are visible to the whole world. Rooted in the sense that where you have kept it is going to make it to be available for a long time. And then it's visible because you have given it the accessibility like Esther mentioned, accessibility doesn't mean that it is open. It may require you to authenticate. For instance, that cassava base that I mentioned, you have to authenticate before you can access the data there. But if you visit Zenodo, you just click on it and you open the data. So the open does not, open access does not mean that, accessibility does not mean that it's completely open. Please, let's be aware. So what kind of repository can you use? We have Zenodo. I've mentioned that over and over. It's a general repository for data. You can put in your codes, presentations, reports, training materials. And one good thing is that you can upload up to 50 gigabytes. Now we have another one that's called Harvard Dataverse. It's hosted by Harvard, and different institutions host their repositories there or even store their data there. So it is general, it's generic, and it has a bigger capacity. It can allow to upload up to 1 terabyte. That is it, and that's massive. And then Africa Archive, we know, many of us should be aware about Africa Archive. We are aware about Archive before. Now we have Africa Archive in collaboration with Ubuntu.net in East and Southern Africa. It's for African research that provides a platform for African scientists. It is free of charge. You go in there and drop your data there. So you don't have to pay. And then we have Figshare. This is for general repository. Uploads up to 20 gigabytes. And Dryad also is a general repository. It allows you up to 300 gigabytes. If you observe, Harvard has the largest capacity for you to upload the large data sets, and then you come down to others. Africa Archive I'm not sure you can upload that large data set at a go, and many more that are still available. Thanks, Esther. So what we are going to answer this in our Google Doc. And let me share the link again, because if you do not have it, what data repository do you plan to use? I'm assuming you do not have. And if you have, on what type of repository have you already used? So we have mentioned those ones that are open, free for you to use. Which one are you planning to use? And we go to the Google Doc now. Exercise 1. If you can't get to the Google Doc, you can type it in the chat. But I could see that we are almost every one of us were on the dock. Yeah, this is good. So it seems the volume of typing have reduced. So that over to you. You have stopped sharing the screen.
Yeah, yeah, because it's difficult for me to share the presentation and look at the Google Doc. But
Okay.
I'll share it in a bit. But I find it interesting that we see lots of Africa Archive,
Yeah.
Zenodo, Figshare, not necessarily a disciplinary specific. So in level one, I think, if I remember correctly, this is a while ago, we selected also what data repository you could use via using fair sharing to look it up.
Mhm.
So if you forgot about that, then you can also scroll down and check that out again just to see what you answered there or maybe what your other options are. But I think everyone is done typing, so I think we can move on to the next part. So I'll share the screen again. But it is your topic, so you have to do some more talking.
Yeah. I think it's over to you now. The next slide.
No, I think you were gonna do file formats, right?
Yeah.
I can, but
Yes, sorry. Yeah, it's 5 formats. Yeah, 5 formats. Now let's look at this. I want to give an example. In 1995, Microsoft used to have this WordPad. It is extension .doc. And then the Excel used to be like a slide rule that we were using. In fact, initially it was a DOS format environment. Then they move on, they have the GUI, which have extension of XLS. In the 2000, they move over to XLSX. And if I try to use my file that is saved as XLSX in a computer that was made in 1999, it will not be able to read it. Do you know the reason? The reason is that it is in proprietary format. That format is specific for Microsoft product and to some specific kind of operating system. So what we are saying here is this: proprietary data often are not readable without the corresponding commercial software and may become obsolete in the future. So example that I just gave now about Microsoft is a good one. If you have been using Starter before and you have the old format, if the new format that you have created now, if you want to use it in the whole system, it won't open it. SPSS, the same thing too happens to it. If you have Microsoft Audio, saved as WMV, you will realize that in the future, you may not be able to open that file because it is proprietary to Microsoft. So what we are saying is that when you want to have your file that will be reused or reusable, you need to make that format to be open data format, which is a freely available published specification which places no restriction, monetary or otherwise, upon its use. For instance, if I want to save document that is in Word, I will save it as TXT text or PDF. TXT can easily be edited. PDF, quote and unquote, may not, but we have some software that can break it down. So, and if I want to have tabular data set, instead for me, remember the work that we did last in the Level 2, the part 1, that data that were given was saved as Excel format, XLX. So the one that is collected is now saved as CSV. Now, for us to ensure that we have a format that will be open, that data that is in Excel or SQL should be converted to CSV. CSV is an open standard platform. It's an open format. So whether you want to use it in a computer that was made 20 years ago, the one that is made now, or the one that we make that will be coming up in another 20 years, they will be compatible. So that's a good example. We still have others. And when we're talking about the audio, now conversion comes in. The WMV, which is audio proprietary to Microsoft, it will be good that you convert it using our conversion from proprietary to open format. The open format for WMV is MP3. For images, we have JPEG, we have TXT for text, we have CSV, and many more like that. So remember, do not share your file in a proprietary format. Ensure that it is an open format that can be used in the future. And if it is not, use conversion tools to convert it to open format, which is often possible, but may result in some loss of data. Please remember that. It may result into some of the loss of data. Okay. Let's see. So the second exercise, we are going back to our Google Doc. If you can't open it, you can type in on the screen here. I would like you to tell us what format will you share the data in? That data that you are planning to share, what format will you share it? And are these formats proprietary or open? After that one, you tell us the reason why you say it is proprietary or it is open. So shall we go to the spreadsheet? Sorry, to the Google Doc. That will be exercise 2. Okay, that is encouraging what we have here. It's not a sin if you have used proprietary format before. Sometimes we may not know and we just do, okay, that's what is in vogue. So it is not a sin. It is not, it is, we have not committed anything grievous, but henceforth we ensure we make our data to be in open format for future reuse. So the volume of typing has reduced. I think so.
Yeah, I think we can, if you're not done typing, please continue, but I think we can slowly move on. Maybe before we move on to the next part, do we have any questions after this? Maybe file formats and data repositories are now super clear. I hope so, but if not, then now is a good opportunity to ask a question. And in the meantime, I'll figure out how to reshare the slides. Okay, if everything is clear, then we'll move on to the next bit. There's also opportunity to ask questions again at the end, or if you want to interrupt us, that's also fine. Okay, moving from file formats to reusable. Well, actually, file formats is also relevant for reusable. If you can't open it, then yeah, good luck trying to reuse it. That's what we found out on Tuesday, where some people couldn't open the file. So this is why it's important to share it in the right file format, because that also helps for reusable. So we'll go a little bit again into license and then a lot about documentation. And in order for your data to be reusable, it's also helpful to manage it in accordance with best or recommended research data management practices. So we're not going into that a lot in this session because we're focusing on the sharing part. But ideally, you would manage and sort the data in such a way that it also is reusable for others, not just uh, put on a spreadsheet or a table somewhere where it's not clear what each of the variables is in that table. But yeah, we unfortunately don't have a lot of time, so we're going to focus on licenses and documentation for now. And so licenses, we already went into that on Tuesday from the perspective of if you want to reuse it, data needs to have a license. So if the data or the software doesn't have a license, you as a reuser cannot reuse it. So hopefully that then also makes sense that if you are going to share data, that you also attach it or assign a license to the data, because otherwise that means that your data cannot be reused. And we went into level one, how software and data have different licenses. And today we're only going to briefly repeat the licenses for data, which look like this. So everything starting with the CC, and there's also other data licenses, but we'll use the Creative Commons licenses for this session. And if you remember, the amount of letters place more restrictions on what can be done with the data reuse. Um, so for example, CC BY, you can do anything with the data. You just need to cite it. If you use CC BY SA, that means that you'll need to do the same things as CC BY, but the SA part comes into play, which means share alike. So that means that you'll need to share it under the same license as anything else that uh, people want to reuse. So that means that if people are reusing your data and they're adding or they're deleting bits, then they'll need to share it under this license. So you can oblige them to do that. For CC BY and D, which means non-derivative, that means that no one can actually adjust your data. So that can be helpful for certain disciplines. So, for example, if you do qualitative interviews and you don't want the text to uh, get out of context, so to say, you want it to just be shared in the original format, in the original interview, then this could be a good license. For anything else, I would actually not use it because it's very restrictive, because you need to use the data set as a whole, and then you can't pick and choose whatever is relevant for your research question as a reuser. So it will limit reuse. And so that might be a little bit of a repeat of what we said in level one. And then there's non-commercial, and that means that it cannot be used for commercial purposes. And so with all of these licenses, that doesn't mean that people can't contact you and still ask, for example, if they can do it for a commercial purpose. But in general, this is how you indicate to anyone using a data repository, looking for your data, how they can reuse it. And so we'll unsurprisingly ask you again about what data license you plan to share the data that you want to share under. And if you remember, we've done this for level one as well. So you can also go back to exercise from that um, session. There should be a link in the Google Docs that guides you directly to that session, so you can copy paste your answer from there. Or if you change your mind, you can put on the new license in the Google Doc. Then it's, I guess, also helpful to let us know why you want to use this data license. So we'll go back to the Google Doc. All this stopping sharing and starting sharing. I see a raised hand. Bakari, sorry if I mispronounce.
Yes, that's the right way of pronouncing it. Just yesterday, I attended a webinar with MRC UKRI, and then this issue of licensing came up, and there was this concern that most of these data repositories that are out there are mostly using the CC BY, and which in itself, it has, the freedom for people to even sell the data. And they were like insisting that is not appropriate. I don't know, what is your take on that?
Yeah, that's a good point. Indeed, with CC BY, you could sell the data. I So far I've not really seen any examples of that. So in general, whatever research data is shared publicly already is, I think, quite difficult to make money out of that directly. I think that would still take a lot of effort from the person who's trying to make money off of that. But it could, in principle, happen with a CC BY license. So if you'd rather not have that, then CC BY non-commercial is better. And even then, it could happen that people are not respecting these license requirements, right? That's what we see with things such as ChatGPT. These software or these tools are also built on data which has been shared in some way. But it's not clear what data they're using. You can't refer back to the sources, etc. Whereas a lot of the data that is in there is CC BY, so they should cite the original source, etc. But it's not being done. So sometimes it's quite difficult to retain control over the shared data. So yeah, if that's important, or if you plan to sell the data or profit from it at in one way or another, then maybe wait with sharing publicly. Seeing Bosun's frantically typing. Maybe you also want to share.
I'm not typing again. Is it showing me as typing? Yeah, but I mean, you said it. I mean, for the licensing, most of the time when we put not commercial NC, it's not respected in most cases. And I want to tell you, just like what Esther said, those data that you made open is not even commercial profitable again until it is transformed. So it's going to go through transformation, manipulation, combining with others, and it's going to get worse in terms of getting your credit because Chat GPT is perverse. It's not credible. You see, you make some request and it's going to someone else's data that requires attribution and it's supplying it to you. So it's going to get worse. But in most cases, like you rightly observe, those data, they're already open. Commercially, it's not viable unless it is transformed. Yeah. And in terms of credit, we are still, it's an advocacy thing. We are trying to ensure that people give credit when they use your data. People have been doing it. We still need the whole world to turn a new leaf and do the appropriate thing by citing reused data.
Okay, thank you.
Lamis.
Sorry about that. Actually, I wanted to ask a question that has also been brought up many times in our discussion at this training program, is that where can I, like, for example, go and say, like, this person took my work without crediting me? Is there like an organization or anyone that you could go to, or it's just left for, for the, like, the, if the person who used it is a good person to acknowledge you or not? is there any like regulations or like discipline that could happen?
Yeah, so this falls under copyright law. And so that means that you would have to sue the reuser that is not following whatever it is that you want them to do, whatever requirements you placed on them. And so I think this mostly does not happen a lot because it, of course, takes time and resources from your side to sue someone. And then you could also get into entire battles of can you actually place copyright on research data and facts and etc. So I am actually not aware of any examples of where people actually followed this through. No, I see Bosune shaking his head.
But I've seen a scientist that did some fantastic work in Africa on maize and cereal. Before he made his publication, he saw a paper already on what he's doing, only because he published the data set before his articles or papers were out. So you can imagine how angry or bitter or embittered that scientist is. But he could not sue the person because he considered the cost of suing and the image. Actually, the project was funded with taxpayers' money also. So it's so complicated. I've not seen anyone. I've not seen anyone. I've not.
So I was wondering, like, could this be something that like an organization could take up, just just to like say, for example, like you could go and tell this organization that this person did this and that, and they could like investigate a bit. And if it's true, then like the name of this person would be placed, for the public that this person took that. Because I don't know, because human beings, I don't know, they only go the straight path when there's discipline. Like this is a human being thing, so I was wondering, like, would something like that be possible, or it's impossible legally or not? I know you're not legal experts, but like, has something like that ever crossed your mind?
I think it might be possible. But it would have to there would probably first have to be a big case in America, I suspect, with a win, so that you can actually demonstrate that you could sue people over it. And then I think that will open up the floodgates for people if they can get a cut of the suit percentage or the gain of the whole suing process, etc. I think that could work, but we would need a starting example. Who knows? I might pick this up as a hobby project somewhere, but I'm not. I don't want to do that in the U.S. But it's an interesting concept, and I think actually maybe the suing part is not the most effective one, because what I hope most scientists care the most about is their reputation. So if you can
Exactly.
demonstrate that you've shared this data set before, you shared the preprint before, this was your idea, you shared it, there's a DOI, you have a
Yeah,
date, then you can spread that out in the research community, find some people who will back you up,
exactly.
and then do it that way. If people don't want to play fair, then yeah, that's unfortunately the way to go, I think.
Yeah, yeah. It would be interesting, really. Like, I think maybe it's something that we could think of, even at our end, because this mainly affects, those researchers from, those less represented countries, their work is getting stolen. So if we could establish something like that, then this would give the researchers more confidence, to be more open. But it's something definitely to think about, yeah.
Yeah, we should brainstorm after the session at some point.
Yes,
Yeah.
With the
definitely.
community, everyone interested. How do we do this? Yeah.
Yes, definitely, definitely.
But we can look
I,
at the
I,
embargo.
yeah. I wanted to suggest, I don't know how it might appear or it might be received, but then in the future trainings, when it comes to trainings like this, you can bring in lawyers also, so they get aware and possibly they could find a niche and then play a role in the process. I think that would be really helpful. They can bring their own perspective as well and see what can be done.
Okay, so let me just share what we were practicing in my formal engagement, and it involves a lot of scientists from different parts of the world to agree on it. It was concluded, regardless of the funder, that the data that you are sharing will be under embargo. Embargo means that people cannot access the data. They can see the metadata until you have made your publications. After then, they let it open. It was as a result of somebody using someone else's data that brought about this. So that since that time, there had been no incidents of, somebody using your data before you make the publication. But there are more controls now.
Okay. I also see another question in the chat about requirements for sharing synthetic data compared to sharing real data. In terms of license, I don't think so. But in terms of documentation, and that's where we'll be heading into next, it is more important to really document how you created this synthetic data and perhaps provide people with scripts or extra information so that they can understand how you set the synthetic data up and how does it compare to your actual data set, and what can they do, how can they reach similar conclusions to you. I hope that makes sense. Well, that was excellent discussion about licenses. You would not think that we we would bring that up perhaps from just asking you which license. So it's excellent. And Ahmed, next to your question about the synthetic data, thank you also for bringing up the Open Data Commons Attribution license. So this is not a Creative Commons license, but it's a different license. And yeah, like the Creative Commons license, they work quite similar, but they have a little bit of um, a little difference. It's definitely more focused on sharing data. The CC BY and all of the Creative Commons license are also used for publications, and the Open Data Commons license are really specifically for data. And so I should update the slides and also add those in. And I think you already added the link, but you can also find those licenses there. I think it's 3 that you can check out, and you could also use one of these licenses. So thank you very much for sharing that. Okay. Then I see no more further questions around licenses. Please correct me if I'm skipping over something. But then we'll try to go into documentation because we said we would have plenty of time. We're already 5 minutes to the hour, so we definitely want to have some time for you to work on your README file. All right. So documentation. I think we used this slide before, but just to repeat. So documentation provides context for the work. So this allows yourself, but also other people, to actually understand what has been done with the data and why. So these are very important things to keep track of. And in order to provide some documentation with a shared data set, data repositories tend to ask for a README file, or this recommended practice to add that to the data set, to not just share the data set as its own, but to also provide that documentation with it in a separate file. So for some data sets, it's not needed to be in a separate file, but there's still some information in the README file which can be helpful to still add with the dataset. So I would recommend you to always set up a small README file. Even if it's very tiny or small, it's helpful to have the context and the extra information. And to go back to file formats, this is ideally done in an open format. So TXT, you could also use Markdown, for example, but if it's an open format, it ensures that people can actually open it up. Again, that's very important. And you also, in the README file, need to make sure what the README file is documenting. And it can also be helpful to add that in the README file itself. So this could be project documentation or even file format, file documentation. And so if you do this for the whole project, it can be helpful to place this in the same or the top layer folder together with the data. If you then have subfolders, then it's clear in the README file, or at least you should try to clarify what all of the subfolders are about. So without someone going through all of the data, you can already describe for them if you want to, such folder is holding this data. So if you're interested in that, then you need to go to that folder, etc. And then they don't need to go over all of the data first before finding out which folder is actually relevant to them. And you can also do that at the file level if that is needed. That's not needed for every project, but if all of your files are very complicated and they need additional context for people to understand what the files are about, then it can be helpful to describe that in more detail in your README file. It can also be helpful to structure your README file in some defined sections. So we shared a template with you. That template also had a couple of sections. And so that can be about general information, for example, who created this data set, when, where, or methodological information, which instrument did you use, which data collection process did you use, which people did you interview, how many, etc. And then some sharing and access information. And there you can, for example, also share the license again. The data repository might also have that available, but it can also be helpful to have that in your README file. And also access information if further requirements is needed for access, etc. And you can also do the citation information in there. Then the tip, if you create a lot of the same data sets, it can be helpful to set up a template of your own. So today we encouraged you to use the Cornell template, but you can also set up your own template, right? If this template doesn't work for your data set, or you're finding that some of these questions, yeah, you don't know how to answer that, or it's not really relevant to answer them, then you can set up your own template if you'd like to. Yeah, so I mentioned this Cornell data set or README file, not the data set. And there's also a nice example by Dryad, the repository, who is going into a bit more of README documentation. And we also mentioned that in level 1, that for software, you have different README files because software works a bit different than data. But we haven't included this in this session because the session is about open data. So, but if you have software you also want to share, then you may need to go back to the level 1 slides. Okay, so hopefully this Cornell data, I'm doing it again, Cornell README file is looks a little bit familiar to you because you've opened it up before the session and tried to fill out some of these questions. What we'll do now is to take a couple of minutes to just go over the README file again, based on the information that you received during this session. Maybe you want to upload it. And that will also give us a little bit of time to set up breakout rooms so that you can actually exchange the README file that you've set up and, well, explain or I ideally share the README file, have someone else read it through. And then if they are very confused about what is in this README file, then you can explain. But ideally, they should know what it is that your data set is about by just reading through the README file. That's ideal. That will probably not happen, so you will probably still have a discussion. And if you want to, in the breakout room, just show it instead of having people read it, that is also fine. I hope you can screen share in breakout rooms. So I think the most challenging part of this session is figuring out how to share your README file. So hopefully you can share it either in the chat in Zoom, or you can copy paste your README file in the Google Doc so that, well, yeah, everyone will see it. So do please keep that in mind if you put it in in the chat or in the Google Doc. But hopefully that way we can get you some feedback on your README file. Okay, but we first start with just reviewing our README files and adding in some additional information after all of the information you've received now. And then I think we need to discuss how many people we should put into a breakout room. Let me close this.
So we have about I think would 4 or 5 breakout rooms do? What do you think is better?
I think it would be nice if people are with 3, maybe 4 people, just in case some people are on their phone and cannot share things, but then they can still listen in. And we don't really we have a couple of people from the same discipline, but not enough to make that topic based. So I think we should just do random.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we could do 5 breakout rooms. Emmanuel, will you be able to set that?
Yeah, I think taking the facilitators out, we have about 16 people here. So so I think 4 would be okay time. So we have like 4 today.
Okay. Okay. So do 4 breakout rooms.
And I know we're very annoyingly talking to over you while you're trying to set up your README file or do some corrections. But if you can't join breakout rooms because you're on a phone or other reasons, etc., you can also stay in the main room. If you're completely confused about README files, you can also stay in the main room, ask some questions, etc. We'll see how this goes, I think. Okay, I think you can now join a room. We'll give you... Do they need to move themselves or do they...
Yeah, they'll get a notification to join.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then maybe we can broadcast that they have about 20 minutes for this.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah, just so that they know how long they're in the room.
It's good. People are joining. So if you have any issues with joining the room, that you could let us know. Or if, of course, if you don't want to join a room for any reason, then that's also okay.
Hello.
Hello, Daniel.
Like I said, I'm not able to use my laptop simply because of connection issues, and I'm using a phone. So I'm finding it challenging to use the phone to join the rooms.
Okay. No worries.
Yeah, I can join, but I cannot contribute anything.
No worries. You can just benefit from the discussion, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, just listen in that case.
Yeah.
Then can you put me in any of the rooms then? Because I rejected it. Yeah.
Okay. Emmanuel, would you be able to do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah.
I think that's going quite well.
Yeah.
Everyone is in a breakout room, right? Apart from
just Zoe.
Yeah, but probably connection problems.
Yeah.
Yeah, Esther, you said it will last for 20 minutes, right?
Yeah, maybe do 15 so that we can still discuss in the main room.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because a couple of minutes have passed now, and then can you broadcast that, or should I do it? I do see a broadcast button, but I'm not sure if I can.
Yeah, you can do that.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, let me type that. Okay, And since there's no questions and no things happening, I'm just gonna quickly go to the bathroom.
No worries, take your time.
Thanks.
Okay, so should I pause the recording then?
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm actually quite curious if you have any questions or anything that you want to share with the larger group from the discussions in your breakouts rooms. And so keeping in mind that it's recorded, of course. So if anyone wants to share something that they experienced in their breakout room or something that they found helpful or not helpful, please feel free to raise your hand or to type it in the chat. Because for us as instructors, this is very much a what is going on in the breakout rooms, I suppose. No one has anything that they want to share with the wider group. Everything in the breakout rooms was very clear, no questions. Yes, please.
Meet.
Oh, yes. We were trying to share our screens, but unfortunately, we were unable to do that. And that's one thing. And also, the other thing that in the breakout session I've mentioned is that the README template file, it is in with the extension of .txt file. And one thing that I found is that most of the README files, it's almost that all of them are in .mb files or markdown files. So that is something that I have noticed. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Sorry you weren't able to share your screen. That would have indeed be a bit more convenient. I'm not sure how to fix that in breakout rooms. Maybe for next time.
Yeah, we can. I'm sorry about that. I think by default, the settings is that during breakout rooms, they are not allowed to share, but it's something that we can just change. So I'm sorry about that, Ahmed. Next time we'll ensure that we give everyone the option to be able to share.
Yeah, and otherwise, if you haven't managed to share your README file, maybe you can also do it via Slack with some of the people that you were in the breakout room, just so that you can still get some feedback. So hopefully you can take the discussions further there. Okay, because we haven't got a whole lineup with raised hands, so I'm gonna assume that people are maybe a bit tight. Oh, yes, we have an next one. Please go ahead. Khadija?
Yes, thank you very much. While we're in the breakout room, my colleague there, Jocelyn, actually raised a question. So I thought I should also ask it here. We're wondering if there's a difference between a data management plan and a README file, because at some point there were so many similarities in the questions that were being asked in the README file, and then we're just like trying to compare that README file with the data management plan. So that's the question. Thank you.
Thank you. That's such a good question. Yes. I think the main difference is that for a data management plan, you write that at the start of a project when you're considering how to do data management. So it's also a project-wide plan that you plan to implement. And a README file you can still write before you do the file generation and the data collection, but you might not know what should be in the README file until after you've actually collected the data. So then you'll do that more afterwards. So a README file is about the documentation of the data um, that you can still, for example, in your data management plan, you can say, I plan to write these README files to provide more context about the data. So it's more of a plan, a part of the data management plan. So it's a sub thing, as how I would describe it, but maybe Bosune can can describe
Yes,
it better.
yes, it's a product of data management plan, your DMP. So your DMP, just like Esther mentioned, comes before the project and during the project, because DMP is a living document. At the end of your project, or while you start your data collection, when you started to create your headers for different columns, you need to explain what all these are, the historical background behind your data, so that someone else can understand it. So invariably, README file becomes useful when data management plan completes its work. Because you keep the data management plan, if you want, you can keep it along with your project. If you like, most people will not do it, but your README file is mandatory to ensure that your data sets can make sense to others in the near future, when you may not be available to explain the context behind your data sets.
I hope that made sense. I think this is another great question on maybe we should do a data management plan session at some point in
Yeah,
the future.
yeah. Where I currently work here, we experiencing this, where the data management team, they do their data management after the closure of the project. All the data sets are saved on a network folder, but then the README file is actually missing, although we have the data management plan that is in there. So right now I have my team that is currently working on creating README file, because for us as archivists and librarians, we could not make any sense of some of the data, because when the data was produced, we were not there from the beginning. So it is the README file that tells us, what the data is all about, who is the PI, and what are the variables, and so on and so forth. So from there, then we will also do our preservation and then put them on an access system. So it's the README file is very important.
For sure. Thank you for sharing this. Okay. I think that was it for the README files for now. What I'd like to do is to just shortly point out something we also went over on Tuesday, but this is also relevant when you share data. So I'll just quickly repeat that. And then if you need to leave, then that's fine. But then hopefully we have a little bit more time for questions before we close the session. And so on Tuesday, because we were reusing data, we talked a bit about data citation, because if you're reusing data, you should definitely cite the data you're reusing, because that's probably in the license where people ask, say, for example, CC BY, they ask you to do that, then you should do that. But yeah, if you're sharing data, then you hope that people indeed do that. And so in order to make that as easy as possible for people to do that, it can be very helpful to share in the documentation what you would like to be cited. For example, do you want people to cite the data set that you're sharing, or do you want them to share to cite the research article? And also, you can include in the README file a citation so that people can just copy paste it. So lots of people use reference managers as well. So then the persistent identifier or the DOI is sufficient. But you really want to make people's lives as easy as possible in order for them to follow the license requirements that you put on them and to cite the data set. And you can also repeat your license in the README file if it's more than CC BY, just so that it's very clear what the requirements are for reuse of the data. Yeah, and then this is just a short repeat of how to cite the data. So I don't want to go into full details, but it's very similar as a research article. Some data repositories also give you a suggested citation, so then you can also just copy paste that. And when you share the data and it's connected to a research article, the way to do that is to share the data in your data availability statement in the research article, and so that you can actually properly cite it. Also in other places in the text of the research article, of course, but the data availability statement, it would be the place if you haven't managed to cite your own data set yet. And the example below shows just an example of how you can do that. So you can point that the data are available in the article, but also add this data repository, and that then includes a citation and a link to the DOI. Yeah, again, this might look very different for your data. There's a couple more examples for the Turing way, which you can check out and build upon. But this is the place how to do it. And on the Turing way, there's also a little bit more information on how do you connect all of these research objects around the research article. And so the data availability statement is key in there. But it's also important if you share data or if you share software to then link to the accompanying software data research article, so that everything, like the image, becomes a circle and everything becomes findable. If someone finds only one of these research outputs, that they know there's software available for this research output, or there's a research article available. So that they can all easily find it. So this is why you want to link all of these research objects, ideally via these persistent identifiers, so that they're also available for the long term, not just on the website for 3 months. Okay. I think we want to close it here and maybe give some a little bit more time for questions. But yeah, thank you so much for attending all of these sessions. If you have any follow-up questions, then these are our details. It's been super nice to be doing this for a couple of sessions and to actually see the names getting more familiar. So it's been very nice. So thank you very much for attending, and thank you very much, Emmanuel and Lamis, for inviting us. And yeah, additional resources. Okay. Yeah, that's the end of the presentation. So thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lamis, and the entire host and participants.
Well, we thank you really for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to help us out here and volunteer to be the facilitators for these sessions. And yeah, I think I hope that this will not be the end of our collaboration. We really hope to see you in more sessions in the future, and hopefully in more projects in the future. So thank you very much, Esther and Faisal. Thank you very much. It was a lovely session. Okay, then. So I guess if there are no questions, we could end the session, and we will see the trainees next week. We'll be seeing a lot of us in the coming weeks. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye
Have fun
bye.
with the rest of the program.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye bye. You're welcome.